Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. After the main character dies in his previous life, he gets reborn as the ARK Reaper King inside of Monster Hunter. How will Monster Hunter react to the ARK Reaper King?
Monster Hunter, what if I am ARK Reaper King? Chapter 1, Buried in Acid and Earth. The first thing I remembered was pain. And not the kind that came with a wound or a broken bone. It was deeper, older. Like I had been pulled through something sharp and endless, then pressed into heat and rot and silence. Then I woke up underground. I didn't have hands anymore. No limbs I recognized. The weight of my body stretched far longer, heavier than it should have been. My breath was gone because I didn't need to breathe. My heartbeat was gone because I didn't have a heart. But I was alive. Or something close enough. I tunneled upward by instinct. My claws curved, acid wet, serrated like obsidian carved through the sand and bedrock like wet bark. My tail moved with segmented force behind me, dragging like a live wire. I felt the heat of the surface far above. Felt prey, large and slow. It was like my new body had radar for meat. By the time I broke through the cavern roof into the wild spire waste, I had already accepted two things: I wasn't human anymore, and this was Monster Hunter world. The sky above was red with dust and lightning. A Baroth crashed through mud to my left, slamming its head into a fleeing pack of Jagras. The distant storm cloud coiling over the horizon, I remembered it. Elder's Recess, where the earth itself cracked under the breath of Nergigant. But I wasn't a wyvern. I wasn't a monster native to this world. I was a Reaper King. From ARK. And that meant something very specific. I didn't evolve. I spawned. I hadn't been born, I'd been deployed. Buried like a parasite. Called up from below. I crouched low in the sinking mud, watching the Baroth smash its way across the basin. It hadn't noticed me yet. Nothing had. But I wasn't exactly hidden, either. My carapace was massive, black, and chitinous with faint bioluminescence that pulsed along my spinal ridges. My tail curled beneath me, scorpion-shaped, tipped with a clawed bulb so toxic I could feel it leaking into the air. I had no need to eat. But I hungered anyway. And I remembered everything. My life before. The game I used to play. Monster Hunter was supposed to be a cycle of struggle and survival. Players grinding sets, studying monsters, learning their patterns. I'd died in a stupid accident in my old life, traffic, I think. Something mundane. I'd thought that was the end. It wasn't. I'd woken here. As this. And I already knew this world wasn't prepared for me. I wasn't just another apex predator. I was outside the ecosystem. The handler types in Astera would study me, but they wouldn't find anything in their books. The guild would panic. The researchers would theorize a subspecies. The Fifth Fleet would hunt me. But they wouldn't win. Not yet. I had to make sure of that. Not because I wanted to kill them, but because I wanted to live. The Baroth raised its head. Its nostrils flared. My scent, maybe. Or the sound I made digging up. It started toward me slow at first, then faster. Sludge splashed around its feet as it charged. I didn't move. The old me might have flinched. Tried to run or shout or dodge. But now? I let my dorsal sacs light up. The hum was low, like a wire tightening in the back of my skull. My tail curled forward and launched a thick glob of acid directly into the Baroth's chest. It shrieked as the sludge ate through armor and flesh alike. A second later, I was already there, coiled, pouncing, ripping. The kill was fast. And messy. When I tore through its throat, the sensation was muted. There was no joy in it. No high. Just calculation. Movement. Completion. I stepped back, covered in chunks of still smoking Barath tissue, and hissed. Nothing answered. Good. I dug into the carcass not to feed, but to hide my scent. Barath blood was thick, foul, and strong enough to mask me. If a scout fly swarm picked up on my trail, I didn't want it leading to anything useful. I didn't know how long I had before a team came out here. The guild didn't wait long when apexes went missing. And I had no intention of letting them catalog me. They would call me a deviation. A black rift. A threat. They'd be right. Chapter 2, A Queen Must Fall. The mud cooled fast over the Baratha's corpse. Steam still rose in patches from where my acid had opened him up. A few moments longer and the remains would begin to draw scavengers. Not that they would matter. My claws worked with mechanical patience as I dragged the carcass backward, deeper into the crevice from which I'd emerged. I didn't eat it. I didn't need to. I only wanted the scent. The foul mixture of swamp minerals and cooked flesh clung to my outer shell, soaking into the gaps between my ridged chitin. The sand didn't react to me the way it did to native monsters. When Diablos passed through, the dunes shifted. When Gyuridota slithered, the lakes rippled. But me, I moved like a void. My limbs didn't sink. The ground didn't quake beneath me. I left no prints behind. I didn't mean to do that. It was just how my body worked. That was important. It meant I could hunt here. Even if I didn't belong. The wild spire waste sprawled outward in all directions, dry canyons to the south, fetid wetlands to the east, and a series of jagged cliffs arching up toward the central mesa. I'd already memorized the structure of this area from the game. But seeing it now, feeling it under my claws, hearing the weight of it through my lateral line was different. Everything breathed. Everything moved. Everything obeyed a rhythm. Except me. I stood still under the remains of a petrified tree, letting Barath blood slide down the curved spines of my tail, and focused on the only nearby heartbeat worth tracking. She flew overhead once every 4 hours. Her wing beats echoed longer than any others. Her shadow was unmistakable, wide, precise, regal in its path. She circled over the same spire. Nested on the cliffs just north of Sector 9. Rarely moved beyond her territory unless provoked. Preferred to eat Aptonoth, sometimes Jagras. Could kill both in under 30 seconds. The Rathian. A green blur to most. A boss fight to hunters. To me, she was data. A key test case. One I needed. She wasn't an elder. She wasn't a minor threat, either. She was stable, territorial, and violent. She knew her ground. She patrolled often. But she never expected something to come from beneath. I moved at dusk. Not for drama. Just for cover. The temperature dropped, and the airflow made it easier to trace her scent in the wind. I crawled beneath the sand, tail curled tight over my back, dorsal sacs dimmed to their lowest pulse. I could feel her talons scrape rock a full 60 meters overhead. Her weight adjusted. She shifted to preen. Maybe groom her mate's scent off her shoulders. He hadn't been seen for a while. Good. The stone cliffs here were too narrow for a proper ambush from the air. I couldn't fly, but I didn't need to. I just needed to wait until she came down. I counted every minute. Patient. Cold. Still. And when she dropped slow, relaxed, back turned to me, I moved. I burst from the mud with the force of a geyser, acid already loaded into my throat. The first shot hit her wing joint. She screamed. Not in fear. Just in rage. She twisted in midair, beat her wings twice, then launched a fireball down into the hole I'd left behind. She missed. I was already on the rock face. The advantage of my body wasn't just strength, it was efficiency. I could climb sheer surfaces without noise. My feet hooked into stone without cracking it. I circled her like a tide pulling in. She launched into the air again, eyes scanning the surface, jaws dripping with venom. She was trying to flush me out, but she didn't know what I was. To her, I wasn't a predator. I was an anomaly. She descended again, limping slightly. Her left wing twitched when she adjusted her posture. That was the tell. I struck from behind, tail first. The barb caught her at the base of the skull, just behind the frill. It didn't pierce deep, but it didn't have to. The toxin inside was Reaper grade. I knew from ARK biology it could paralyze even a Giga if applied directly. She roared once more, shorter this time. Guttural. Pained. Her wings flapped twice, then collapsed to her sides. She dropped. I was on her in less than a second, claws at her throat, teeth locked onto the bone plate under her jaw. She didn't move again. I didn't kill her immediately. That was a choice. I needed to test something. Not cruelty. Necessity. Monster Hunter's world wasn't like ARK's. There was no element corruption here. No implants. No tech-based resurrection or artificial spawn cycles. These creatures were organic, ancestral, and lethal in ways ARK's monsters never were. The Rathian had grown from hatchling to apex with nothing but claw, scale, and instinct. She wasn't coded. She was real. Which meant her body might offer something mine lacked. I didn't understand what exactly my own biology was doing here. My acid still functioned. My claws remained hyperdense. My dorsal sacs glowed. But I hadn't had time to test whether my durability or poison evolved in this world. My entire reproductive function, the parasitic implantation ability, remained unused. I didn't want to try that yet. Not unless I had a stable place to hide. Instead, I dissected her wing. Cleanly. Without haste. I peeled the membrane away from the shoulder blade and examined the tissue structure. The density of her muscle was built for repeated strain flight under load, probably from carrying prey. Her bones were hollow, but layered with a mineral compound I didn't recognize from any of ARK's flyers. Likely unique to this world. Maybe something she evolved here over generations. I scraped a thin layer of that bone and swallowed it. Not out of hunger. To see if my body absorbed it. 5 minutes later, I felt it. A pressure across my spine. A hum in my dorsal ridges. My acid sacs thinned slightly, then rethickened with added density. My tail's musculature adjusted. Slightly stronger. Not flight capable. But tougher. I hissed low and curled my tail again. That was the answer. I could evolve here. Not through leveling. Through consumption. Biological integration. The way ARK's Reapers could adapt if they remained outside the simulation long enough. Except here, the rules weren't digital. They were organic. The implication was immediate. If I kept doing this, if I selectively hunted, absorbed the right traits, studied the monsters here, I could become more than just a Reaper. I could become something even the Commission wouldn't recognize. Something this ecosystem couldn't categorize. Not a monster. Not a mutation. A shadow under the bedrock. It took 2 more hours to drag the Rathian's body back underground. I didn't leave it to rot. I buried it in a sand pocket near Sector 7, under the roots of a gnarled, dead cactus tree. Her blood would mix into the soil. Her scent would linger. But there'd be no visible signs of battle. No fire scorch. No explosive damage. No claw marks matching any known species. Only one thing would be obvious to a hunter. She had vanished. And the Barath before her. Chapter 3, The Heartbeat Beneath Sand. I worked through the night. Not out of exhaustion, but necessity. The Rathian's carcass was cooling under 3 meters of sand, sloped downward beneath a petrified cactus grove where even the heat of the sun hesitated. Her blood had already begun leaching into the soil, attracting small insects and damp rot flies. The scent was strong, pungent, spiked with something her species only produced once every few cycles. Estrus hormones. Even underground, I could still smell it. It wasn't by chance. I had kept the glands intact. When I'd dismantled her, I'd been careful. Her scent sacs, those thin violet strands along her hindgut, typically used to attract a mate or mark territory, were still whole when I stored them between my rib plates. I didn't need them for sustenance. But I needed what they could do. The Diablos didn't think like a human. It didn't see. Not the way we did. But it could hear through its horns, feel vibrations through its chest, and most importantly it could smell. And when it smelled a Rathian in heat trespassing on its territory, it would dig. Fast. Hard. Violently. I just had to be there waiting. By sunrise, the waste had changed. Wildspire didn't cool the way the ancient forest did. There was no real dew. The humidity didn't ease. It hardened. The air got thicker. The dunes turned from powder to crust. I sank less as I moved, which made tracking easier, but also louder. If anything had ears buried within half a kilometer, they could already hear me move. That didn't bother me. I wasn't trying to hide today. I moved to the northwestern quadrant of the map, Sector 8, just where the ridged cliffs collapsed into that wide, silent basin. It looked empty from above. From the game, I remembered it as a dead zone, only small Kestodon passed through there. But I'd seen it firsthand now. It wasn't empty. It was avoided. That's where Diablos lived. I chose the western rim for the bait site. The slope there was shallow but tight, funneled between two half-buried ribs from some long-dead desert leviathan. The bones created an echo chamber. If the Diablos came, it would be forced to move inward, not outward. I could trap it with terrain. I scraped the Rathian scent along the upper edge of the stone. Not too much. Just a smear. Then another on the cactus trunk. Then one more, exactly 2 meters east, to mimic the mark of a tail swipe. It was enough. Then I waited. Time passed differently now. I didn't breathe. I didn't shift. I only watched. The wind picked up around the second hour. I curled under a stone ledge, dorsal sacs dimmed to pale blue, and tracked the sand's vibration with my tail. Each second that passed, I recalibrated my weight distribution, accounting for potential seismic displacement. And then it hit. A rhythm. Deep. Not explosive. Not heavy. Coiled. The Diablos didn't gallop. It bored. The tremor hit the lower basin first. The sand dipped inward, subtle. Like a drain being pulled somewhere beneath the crust. Then it cracked. The Diablos burst from below like a black spearhead, one horn already turned toward the sky. Its mouth was open, but it didn't roar. It just snorted short, sharp, focused. It had found her. Or what it thought was her. Its claws scraped the rock, carving deep notches into the basin's edge. It circled once, then again, lowering its head every few seconds to taste the air. The tension in its haunches told me everything. It was angry. Not confused. It had mated before. And it remembered what heat scent meant. I let it dig. Let it circle. Let it tear up the slope in a fit of territorial display. It didn't know I was behind it. Not until I moved. I launched acid first. The glob struck its left side, melting through its outer plating and exposing the raw black hide beneath. It bellowed louder now, not just sound but seismic force, and twisted in my direction. Its tail slammed into the stone where I'd been a second earlier. Too slow. It tried to burrow. I didn't let it. My tail hooked under its jaw and yanked. The strength behind the motion wasn't just mechanical, it was reactive. My dorsal ridges lit up in sequence as my nervous system rooted heat down my spine. My venom sacs tightened. The Diablos hissed. I struck again, not with acid, but claws. I tore at its underside, exposing pale muscle and soft inner scale. Blood gushed. Not just a wound, a breach. It tried to ram me. I wrapped around its face. The horns were huge. Bigger than I'd remembered. Each one longer than my arm span, and covered in soil still packed from its last dig. I braced against them, using their own leverage against it. When it twisted, I let it. When it pushed, I pulled. I didn't overpower it. I let it burn its strength. Then I went for the neck. Not the front. The side. Behind the ridge, where the bone dipped inward near the throat cavity. I knew how it worked. I'd seen autopsies. I'd carved it a dozen times in the game. Here, there was no health bar. Just tendon. Just nerve. My tail plunged in. The barb pierced deep. The Diablos screamed. Not the way monsters usually screamed. It was slow. Choked. Real. It bucked, then fell. And didn't rise again. I didn't move for 20 minutes. I waited until the sand settled again. Until the sky dimmed. Until the insects came back. Only then did I begin the process of cutting it open. I didn't take much. I didn't need bone, or hide. I went for the inner horn canals, those long spiral grooves along the base of its cranium. They connected directly to the acoustic nodes inside its head. It was how it heard underground. How it navigated via echolocation, despite poor vision. I extracted them cleanly. They pulsed when I took them. Still faintly alive. Good. I bit once. Swallowed the tip. The reaction came slow, but deliberate. The dorsal hum returned. My vision didn't change, but my perception did. I could feel the terrain now. Even the slightest echo. A beetle scuttling 2 meters to my left. A shifting Kestodon nest near the canyon. A wind shear curling through the valley toward Astera. I crouched, lowered my tail, and closed my eyes. And still saw. The Diablos had given me sonar. I buried the rest. Not out of respect. Out of strategy. If they found the corpse, they'd date the wounds. They'd measure the bite radius. The missing horn groove. And they'd know something new was hunting here. But if I buried it in a sand funnel with acid saturation and masked sense, it would vanish. Like the Rathian. Like the Barath. Only the bones would remain. Eventually. And by then, it would be too late. Chapter 4, The Threads Beneath Stone. The heat above never reached this deep. The caves beneath Wildspire Waste were older than any map showed, and not even the guild surveys reached these tunnels. I followed no path. No monster trail. I moved by echo. Every claw step triggered a pulse. Every scrape of stone underfoot sent feedback along my dorsal ridges, threading the information back into something like sight. It wasn't the same as vision. Not quite. There were no shapes, no colors, only pressure zones, densities, vibration curves. But with Diablo's acoustic sense stitched into my nervous system, I could feel things no living creature was meant to feel. There was a nest below. Not large. Not ancient. But active. The webs hadn't reached the surface yet. The spiders down here weren't hungry enough to risk open air. But that would change. Because I was going to kill one. I moved carefully through the first kilometer of tunnel. Not out of fear. but precision. I didn't want to waste energy. My body still didn't tire the way it had when I was human. But now, I noticed that each movement, the tightening of a claw, the flex of a tail muscle carried weight. I was heavy. Durable, yes, but not meant for high-speed travel in narrow stone. The rocks here curved inward. The floor sloped at unpredictable angles. Crystals grew along the ceiling, some vibrating faintly when my sonar hit them. Natural mineral formations. Not valuable, but sharp. I lowered my body posture to a low crawl. 3 limbs forward, 1 rear limb anchoring me, tail curled along my right flank. I moved like a centipede, no longer rushing, letting each footstep fall silent into the sediment. I could smell silk ahead. Not new. Old. Bitter. Something had died here. The scent was buried under 2 layers of rock deeper than what the caves normally allowed. That meant the Nursilla had been tunneling. Good. I needed a mature one. Not a juvenile. I reached the first web an hour later. It was small, strung between 2 halves of a crumbled stalagmite. A Kestodon, half digested, hung in the center. Its belly was split open. Not from claws. From fangs. 8 puncture marks. The poison had been injected slowly. Venom type, paralytic, not acid. That narrowed it. Definitely Nursilla, not Rachnoid. I crawled lower and pressed my ventral side flat to the rock. The web pulsed. Faintly. That was the first real sign. It wasn't just a trap. It was a wire. A listening post. Nursilla webs weren't random, they were networked. I extended a claw, sharp but curved inward, and tested the web's elasticity. It stretched. Not far. Not much. But enough. I cut it. And waited. The vibrations moved down. Not toward me. Not immediately. But somewhere deeper in the tunnel, I felt a pulse return. Something shifted. Legs. Chitin. A slow descent. It knew something was here. But it didn't know what. That gave me one opportunity. Not 2. I began to circle the cavern's lower rim, always keeping 1 point of contact with the wall. My sonar mapped the cave in full, stalactites above, mineral-rich water drips falling once every 12 seconds near the west wall, deeper tunnel access 3 meters beyond the web structure. The Nursilla would approach from below. Maybe upside down. I slowed my heartbeat. Not metaphorically. I could control it. I pulsed my dorsal sacs once, then shut them down entirely. The glow faded to 0. Nothing in me moved. And from the dark below, I felt it arrive. First the air shifted. Then the stone. Then, the silk. It crawled up from beneath the lower stone ridge, legs curled, abdomen low, back arched. It had attached itself to the ceiling above me in less than 5 seconds, fully upside down. I counted 8 limbs. 5 spinnerets. A visible poison sac under the thorax. Perfect. It was a mature female. I let it scan the web. Let it turn, slowly, to investigate the cut section. It didn't notice me until I exhaled. The breath was silent. But hot. It dropped instantly, faster than I expected, twisting in midair and flinging webbing in a wide arc. The silk didn't stick to stone. It wasn't meant to. It was a wide net pattern meant to catch insects, maybe Jagras pups. I stepped through it easily and ducked low as she leapt. The fangs came first. She wasn't testing me. She was hunting. Good. I needed her blood flowing. I struck once, tail forward, aiming not for the kill but for the spinnerets. The barb pierced through 2 of them. Her scream echoed through the stone, louder than the Diablo's. Higher. Sharper. It scraped the inside of my skull. She spun, rolled, kicked. One leg sliced open the side of my mid-torso. Not deep. But it bled. It stung. I bit down. Hard. My jaw clamped around the base of her thorax. The crunch wasn't clean, it was wet. Sloppy. Internal organs split under my fangs. Her upper legs buckled, then flailed. I didn't let go. She tried one last desperate tactic. She flung Silk upward, hoping to snag onto the stalactites and pull herself away. She launched acid to a weaker version, thin and green. It splashed harmlessly against my shoulder. I pulled. Her body split. The upper section hit the floor. The rest collapsed. The fight was over. I didn't celebrate. I just began cutting. The silk glands were deeper than I expected, buried near the third joint in her lower abdomen. I had to peel away 2 layers of chitin to get to them. The organs were fragile. I cut carefully. Each was the size of a small melon, pale yellow and slick with internal lubricant. I separated them and slid them into my rib hollows. They twitched faintly. Still viable. I moved to the poison sacs next. Different type than mine. Not as corrosive. But possibly usable in mixes. I stored one. Left the other. Then I sat. Not out of fatigue. Out of observation. The cave was quiet now. Not silent. Quiet. Like something holding its breath. I placed one claw into the earth and began digging, not a full tunnel. Just a node. A small pit, half a meter wide, angled toward my underground nest in Sector 7. If the webbing worked, if my body adapted to it, I would reinforce this cave with my own silk. A forward outpost. Something close to a den. The glands reacted faster than expected. 30 minutes later, I felt it in my shoulders. My body began spinning silk. Not from my mouth. From a new orifice low on my abdomen, between the second and third leg pairs. It wasn't thick at first. But it held tension. I spun it around a broken stone, let it dry for 5 seconds, then pulled. It held. Stronger than I'd expected. I tested it again, this time spinning it across a gap, walking backward, anchoring the silk in 3 contact points. It hardened. Now I had what I needed. A building material. Organic. Acid resistant. Lightweight. It wasn't for traps. It was for the future. Chapter 5, Resin, Blood and Bone. It took nearly an entire day to reach the old Barath site again. Not because of the distance, I could cross wild spires sublayers in under an hour now, my body adapted to tight turns and low clearance terrain, but because of the materials. I traveled slowly, dragging the stripped limbs of the Nursilla behind me by silk cord. Its thorax was lashed to my back like a hollow shell. Its leg bones clattered behind me, bound into a spiral harness I'd knotted in place using my new glands. The silk worked. It didn't decay. It hardened like resin the moment it dried. I tested it every 10 meters, pulling the cords tight, shifting my gait, testing drag. No slip. No slack. My hands, once foreign to me, now functioned with cold purpose. They no longer flexed the way a human's did. They bent back further. Wider. Stronger. The black armor along my fingers had thickened from the Diablo's marrow. I could crush stone with 3 digits. I did not make mistakes anymore. I turned into the tunnel mouth beneath Sector 7 in silence. No light filtered this far down. No airflow. The cactus roots above acted like a roof. I had picked this place after the Barath kill for 3 reasons. First, proximity to water. A shallow underground stream trickled beneath the cave floor. Its minerals soaked into the sand, softening it just enough to dig by claw alone. Second, limited seismic exposure. No monsters passed through here. Not Diablos, not Gyuratodus, not even the Scout Kestodon Pax. The absence was deliberate. This tunnel was beneath a sandstone overhang that made burrowing dangerous. Most monsters avoided it. Third, acoustic concealment. Nothing echoed here. Even now, my sonar came back muted. The walls were too irregular. Sound bounced unevenly. It made the chamber feel smaller than it was. That was good. It meant no one could find me by accident. I was ready to begin. I anchored the Nersilla remains into the north wall, dragging its largest two leg bones to the entrance first. I buried them vertical, only a quarter exposed, and wrapped them in crisscrossing silk. Like spines. A warning. Nothing could read it consciously, but predators would sense it on instinct. This wasn't prey territory. This was a nest. The main chamber was shallow, now only 10 meters wide by 5 long. I expanded it slowly. I didn't need to rush. My claws scooped sand in broad arcs, but I moved carefully. The resin in my silk sacks was still low. It needed time to replenish. I paced my digging. Each time I pulled a full load of earth out, I packed the walls tighter. Silk first. Then a lining of acid-scorched mud. Then bones. I was building a system. Spine to shell. Like an exoskeleton. The floor came next. I flattened it by claw and lined the base with strips of Rathian hide. She had died too easily. But her body was useful. Her wing membranes absorbed moisture. I used them to pad the perimeter, then filled the center pit with ash from a dead cactus I'd harvested the day before. Why ash? Because it held heat. And I needed heat to breed. Not yet. Not now. But soon. My tail coiled tightly as I worked, dragging lines of silk behind each pass like a spider threading a web. Not for trapping. For structure. For geometry. This wasn't a lair. It was a womb. By the time the chamber reached 12 meters, I began the second phase. I returned to the Baratha's burial site. It had decayed more than I expected. The bones had started to collapse inward. Scavengers, maybe small ones, had tunneled partway through the thoracic cavity. I hissed low and scoured the floor for prints. None. They had no feet. Likely venom leeches. From the sinkholes. They wouldn't return. I cut the remaining pieces out by force. I didn't care about elegance now. I broke the spine apart and cracked open the thigh bones to reach the marrow. Barath tissue was dense with mineral compounds from wallowing. The marrow still pulsed with trace electrolytes. I ate it directly. Warm. Wet. Tasted like sand and iron. The dorsal sacs along my spine hummed once, then went still. That was enough. I took the ribcage whole and bound it in silk, dragging it back to the nest. It took 2 trips. I placed the Barath ribs along the east wall, curving them inward like the teeth of a shut jaw. The rest I burned. Acid flare. My own venom ignited when applied in a specific mixture: 1 part Diablo's horn scrap, 1 part digestive bile, 1 part Nersilla web resin. The flame didn't last. But it burned hot. Hot enough to char the bones black and seal the nest walls with smoke. It masked the scent. Would take days for it to wear off. That gave me time. I coiled in the center of the nest and finally let my body rest. Not sleep. Just stillness. The silence was total. Above, I could feel the vibrations of the sun shifting. The heat curling the stone. Small birds flitting through the waste. No larger monsters. Not yet. The Rathalos would return eventually. But I wasn't ready for him. Not yet. I spent the next 12 hours inside. Spinning. reinforcing. I marked a secondary exit tunnel at the back only 2 meters wide, angled toward the west cliffs. If the commission ever came too close, I could escape underground. I laced that path with silk. If anyone entered that way, I would feel them tug the cord. I also began shaping the implantation pit. The center of the chamber had been dug slightly deeper. Just 1 meter enough to bury something large. Not a monster. A host. I didn't have one yet. But soon, something would come close enough to drag down here. I would paralyze it. Implant it. Leave it. The larva would grow in under a day if I fed it. That was what Reapers did. Even in ARK, the implantation process had been brutal. Forced. The host died. Always. Here, I didn't know what would happen. But I would find out. I wasn't growing a child. I was testing evolution. By nightfall, I unsealed my dorsal sacs and let the ambient heat inside. They pulsed faintly now. Not the same as before. Louder. More resonant. The Diablo's sonar had fully integrated. I could feel the sand's heartbeat now. The crawl of time beneath the waist. Even the wind. It registered. And something else. Far off. Faint. A heartbeat. Southwest. Not a monster. 2 legs. Light gear. Human. A scout. Alone. I paused. Tilted my body slightly. Tracked the rhythm. Felt it change. Fear. They had seen something. Or heard something. Or found something. I didn't move. Not yet. But I watched. And the next chapter would begin there. Chapter 6, Capture, Coil, Consume. The scout's heartbeat faded westward. I let it go. It wasn't time yet. They were alone, yes, light-footed, underarmed, likely gathering traces or mapping small monster paths. But too early. Too dangerous. My nest wasn't finished. The silk still needed testing. My implantation pit was untested, my venom protocols unmeasured. If I took a human now and failed if they escaped or the larva rejected them, I'd expose everything. So I turned my mind to a safer question. Could I trap a monster? Not kill. Not dismember. Trap. Alive. The webbing I'd spun from Nersilla glands had strength. It could bind bone. Hold a ceiling. Thread across dead weight and dry stone without snapping. But webbing was more than rope. To be useful, it needed to capture. To withstand thrashing. Screaming. Flailing wings or claws or heat or spit. I needed a subject. Not too big. Not too smart. Not something that would alert the guild if it vanished. Jagras. Or better, Kuluyaku. Alone, cowardly, but unpredictable. Intelligent enough to use tools. Emotional enough to flail when cornered. Perfect. I moved above ground that night. The wind had shifted by midnight, curling from east to north. That meant most of the small prey species would head west into the canyon roots where water condensed around the rock arches. I followed at a distance. Not through the sand. Not yet. This time, I stayed to the cliffs. My claws found purchase easily now. Diablo's bone had strengthened their weight tolerance, and my silk anchored my hind legs during every vertical ascent. I wrapped a climbing line behind me and hooked it to my dorsal ridge, letting the tension keep me balanced. Even the way I moved had changed. No longer slithering. I climbed now. I scaled. From above, the waist didn't feel hot. It felt dry. Still. The kind of dry that slowed everything down. Made monsters sluggish. made prey slow to react. That helped. I crouched behind a sandstone spire and waited. Kuluyaku usually appeared at dawn, scouring loose gravel for stones to use in mock defense. They didn't always travel alone. But sometimes one broke from the pack. That's what I needed. One break. I saw him at first light. He was mid-size, maybe 2 meters tall at the beak, orange-plumed but matted with dirt, dragging one foot as if he'd sprained it. His claws were chipped, likely from trying to steal eggs from a higher roost. He clucked twice low, not alert. Just tired. He didn't see me. But I didn't move yet. I tracked his path through the gravel. He dug twice. Found nothing. Then moved to a cluster of rocks where the sediment formed a small depression. That's where I built it. The trap. I spun the web in the hours before his arrival, anchoring it between 3 fossilized tree stumps. The base silk was already dry, hidden beneath a dusting of powdered bone. I'd smeared it with residual Rathian venom, non-fatal, but irritant grade. Just enough to sting. Above, I hung a stone. Not large. Not heavy. Just reflective. Something to draw attention. He saw it immediately. Eyes brightened. Body tensed. He moved for it. Claws raked the sand. And then contact. The trap flared. Web snapped tight. Not inwards. Up. The moment he stepped into the circle, I triggered a pull line from behind the ridge. The entire center web inverted, dragging his legs out from under him and slamming him against the stone wall behind. He shrieked. High-pitched. Ugly. Flapped his arms in panic, slapping at the air. But he didn't break free. His claws tugged at the resin lines. One tore but not fully. The others held. I'd wrapped the tension points in doubled loops, crisscrossed to prevent torsion escape. He kicked. Screamed. And then I arrived. I didn't jump. I dropped. 6 meters straight down. No grace. Just wait. I landed beside him, claws extended, dorsal sacs flaring to full brightness. Not a threat display. A warning. He froze. Eyes wide. Chest heaving. He didn't understand what I was. He wanted to flee. But he couldn't. I watched him for a full minute. Observed his stress response. Heart rate. Salivation. Heat output. He was overheating already. The silk held too tight around his ribcage. I stepped forward and hissed once low, steady, with just a trace of venom sprayed into the air. He passed out. From fear. I bound him in new silk, tighter, wetter, lined with fresh strands from my secondary gland. Then I began dragging. Slowly. No urgency. He didn't weigh much. Less than a jagras. But I still had to anchor each forward movement with a bracing line. 6 hours later, we reached the nest. The nest had changed while I was gone. My heat pit had absorbed enough thermal residue to maintain a warm center. The air was heavier. Smelled of acid and blood and now silk. Good. It would feel like home to anything born here. I placed the Kuluyaku in the implantation pit. Unconscious still. I adjusted his limbs carefully, not out of mercy, but efficiency. I needed the chest cavity exposed. The abdominal membrane relaxed. The rib cage angled upward. Implantation wasn't surgical. It was instinct. I raised my tail, uncoiled the inner barb, and aligned the sting with his sternum. 1 second. Then puncture. The larval sac slid into his torso. It didn't kill him. It never did, not at first. His eyes fluttered. He woke. Too late. The larva was already inside him. He convulsed once. Claws twitching. Gagging. Then stillness. I covered him in silk and left him. Let the heat do its work. The larva would take 12 hours. If it followed ARK's pattern, it would consume only internal matter organs, not skin. External form wouldn't change until the final 2 hours. Then the host would begin rejecting tissue. The monster inside would push free, tear loose, and stand. Not Kuluyaku. Not Reaper King. Something in between. If it lived, it would learn from me. If it died, I would start again. But tonight finally I was not alone. Chapter 7, Stretch the thread until it holds. The larva pulsed inside its host. I felt it. It moved without sound, without shape, without breath. Still unseen beneath the stitched silk that covered the pit. The Kuluyaku had not woken again. Not since implantation. He had twitched once, long after the sting, and then gone utterly still. The process was quiet now, metabolic, cellular, raw. I didn't stay to watch. I'd already memorized the cycle. 12 hours from insertion to emergence. 6 for tissue override. 2 for structural split. The final hour for awakening. I had time. And I needed more than one. One larva couldn't survive alone. Couldn't hunt. Couldn't build. One wasn't a hive. So I left. I didn't climb this time. I ran. I took the northern tunnel out of the nest, coiled low, tail dragging behind me in a shallow arc to erase my tracks. The silk strands across the entrance pulled taut as I passed through. No tug. No tension. Nothing had disturbed them. The nest was safe for now. Above ground, Wild Spire was half shrouded in heat haze. The sun hadn't yet reached its full burn, but the air already shimmered. Water glinted along the eastern basin. Wind rippled across the mud. I could smell the excrement of grazing Aptonoth from kilometers away. I ignored them. Too slow. Too docile. I needed reaction. Something that would fight. Not long. Not well. Just enough to struggle. So the web could prove itself. I tracked southeast, toward Sector 5 where the Jagras roamed. They didn't move in packs this time of year. When the heat climbed high and the rivers dried up, the Jagras split from their nesting dens. The smaller ones migrated to shaded canyons. The alphas stayed near the old stone bridges, claiming what territory they could and attacking anything that came close. One had taken over the far wall of the spiral canyon just under the half-fallen arch. I felt his heartbeat a full minute before I saw him. Heavy. Slow. Rhythmic. His breath rattled. Big lungs. I followed the pulses across the sand and watched from above as he fed. Anoyos lay broken at his feet, half-eaten, wings crushed, neck twisted sideways. The Jagras alpha bit deep into the gut, ripped it open, and slurped the organ pulp like a snake. He didn't look up. Didn't notice me. He was bigger than I expected. His yellow scales were bruised near the neck. Bite marks. Probably from a Barath he'd tried to scavenge from. His tail flicked lazily. His tongue lolled. Perfect. Not a leader. A failure. Still strong. I descended silently, clinging to the vertical cliff face just behind him. My claws held to the stone without noise. My tail extended beneath me, uncoiled and ready. I had already laid the trap. It was strung between 3 boulders near the canyon floor, low to the ground, barely visible. This web was different from the Kuluyaku trap. Larger. Denser. Lined with a secondary chemical resin extracted from Nersilla venom. I'd mixed it myself the night before using part of the Barath marrow as a reactive base. It didn't harden instantly. It burned into the skin first, then clamped. I coated the anchor points with a film of dissolved Rathian wing membrane to absorb impact. That way, when the alpha hit it, it wouldn't snap. It would hug. The bait was simple, a piece of old bone soaked in acid. I'd placed it where the heat would mask the resin's scent. The alpha took it, just as predicted. He sniffed the bone, licked it once, then stepped forward both feet into the web. It held. Not for long, but long enough. He shrieked and thrashed. His claws tore the ground. His tail slammed into the boulders. The silk resisted, screamed under pressure, vibrated like a plucked nerve. He dropped. His side slammed into the grit and gravel, legs caught in a webbed X of resin and muscle. I struck from the cliff. Not with claws. With acid. A full shot, direct to the chest. It didn't kill him. It shocked him. His mouth opened. He choked once. And I landed beside him. His eyes widened. I didn't wait. I coiled his throat in silk. Tight. Clean. Then 2 more loops across his belly and tail. No time to test reflexes. I needed him alive. He bucked once. Then again. Tried to bite. I let him. His teeth hit my armor. Bounced off. I hissed directly into his face. His pupils dilated. Fear. Then stillness. I reinforced the bindings at the legs and neck. Wrapped them 3 times with thickened cord. Then I injected 1 shot of paralytic venom into the exposed flesh above his shoulder blade. Not my normal acid. A slower toxin. One I'd extracted from the Nersilla's secondary fang sac and mixed with Rathian pheromone. It worked in under 2 minutes. His breathing slowed. His eyes fluttered. Not asleep. Not dead. Just ready. Dragging him was harder. He was 4 times the weight of the Kulu. His mass shifted unpredictably. Muscle still twitched. Nerves still fired. I wrapped silk around his torso and anchored the cord to my spine, letting my dorsal armor carry the brunt of the strain. I walked slowly, 1 step at a time, forcing my hips to rotate evenly with every stride. If I stumbled, he would roll. Break free. So I didn't stumble. It took 9 hours. The heat climbed, then broke. Sand cooled. And still I dragged. The entrance to the nest came into view just before nightfall. The silk strands across the entry tunnel hadn't been disturbed. The first larva was still inside. I laid the Jagras in the implantation pit opposite the Kulu's silk cocoon. The nest had changed since I left. My sensors caught faint thumping from inside the cocoon. Not heartbeat. Movement. The larva was waking. Good. It would need food soon. The Jagras would be ready. Not implanted. Not yet. Not until the first spawn emerged. I would let the newborn eat. Taste meat. Move freely. Learn. Then implant the second. Not from mercy. From necessity. A lone spawn would die. A pair might live. Maybe more. Maybe hive. I stood at the center of the nest and uncoiled my tail. Let the silk spin freely, across the ceiling, the walls, the pit. Let the resin thicken into a low-hanging lattice. The vibrations would travel faster now. When the spawn emerged I would know. And when it screamed for the first time, so would the waste. Chapter 8, The Skin Splits Open. The nest was sealed. Not just hidden. Closed. The outer passage was reinforced in 6 layers of silk and soot-lined resin, stretched tight between packed stone columns that bent inward like a throat. I had draped a second false tunnel behind it, an empty burrow that looped and collapsed on itself. If anything entered the wrong way, they would suffocate before they ever saw light again. I stood at the center of the chamber. The pit trembled. The cocoon pulsed. The first larva was waking. The host was no longer recognizable. The Kulu-Yaku's body had swollen. His limbs twitched irregularly. His eyes, once white and panicked, were milk white, now pushed from within by pressure. The feathers that once lined his shoulders were soaked through with membrane and mucus, matted into clumps. His beak had cracked, only partially, and his gullet trembled with breath he no longer needed. He was dying. But the larva was not. It moved like heat. Not by muscle. Not by shape. Just presence. Inside the host's ribcage, I sensed motion, circular, patient. The way a hunting eel circled its prey beneath sand. The bones of the Kulu's torso had begun to separate. Not from pressure. From design. The sternum stretched unnaturally as if softened. That wasn't my venom. That was the spawn's work. Its enzymes. Its growth. Its demand for space. I didn't interrupt. I crouched 3 meters from the pit, dorsal sacs dimmed, limbs tucked in. Watching. My own pulse slowed. Not from fatigue. From anticipation. In ARK, spawns didn't change. They grew. Bigger. Meaner. Heavier. But still patterned. This world wasn't ARK. There were no code strings to obey. No loop templates. No tech-integrated boundaries. The larva had fed on something real, something alive that evolved through millions of years of predation, learning, failing, adapting. What it would become, I didn't know. I would learn. And if it failed, I would kill it. The cocoon split just before dusk. Not loud. No scream. Only a wet sound, like a joint pulled too far. A claw poked free, first thin, black, still wrapped in clear membrane. It twitched twice. Tapped the silk that held it, and then flexed. The second claw followed. Then a forelimb. It wasn't a mirror of me. Smaller. Faster. Built with less armor. But more jointed. More flexible. Like the Kulu's arm bones had been retained but fused with Reaper tissue. It dragged itself out in slow, uneven motions. Its head emerged second, a long snout, narrow, ridged with black chitin, but curved inward where the beak once was. A vestigial memory of its host. No eyes. Not yet. But its dorsal ridge flared twice as it rose from the cocoon, emitting a soft vibration. I answered with one of my own. Short. Low. Recognizable. It stopped. Tilted its head. Then made the sound again. Not a copy. A reply. I moved first. Not fast. But firm. I circled the pit, tail raised, acid sacs sealed. A predator's posture but not a threat. I let it smell me. Its snout flexed. Its claws dug into the silk. It pulled its body upright. Still wet. Still steaming. But it stood. On 2 legs. Not hunched like me. Not crawling. Standing. It was bipedal. A blend of host balance and Reaper structure. Tail short, but heavy. Shoulders narrow. Claws oversized for its frame. It wasn't a Reaper. But it wasn't Kulu anymore. It was mine. It fell on its first step. Not weak. Just unused to gravity. Its legs overextended like it didn't yet know where its body began. I watched. Waited. Didn't help. It stood again. This time slower. More stable. It scanned the chamber. Not with eyes. With sound. It tapped one claw on the wall. Waited for the echo. Then turned toward me. I knelt. Let it approach. It took 4 careful steps. No stumbling now. Stopped 1 meter from my head. Sniffed. Then curled one limb under its torso and lowered itself 1 motion. Submission. Recognition. I touched its head once. Clawed fingers gently tapped the edge of its crown, where the bone was still soft. Its neck shivered. But it didn't pull away. I pressed a second finger to the dorsal ridge, just above its shoulder blades. It hissed. Low. Not a threat. A vocalization. Reaper infants didn't speak. But they remembered sound. This one had already learned 3 tones. 1. Greeting. 2. Request. 3. Submission. I turned toward the Jagras pit. The second host hadn't moved. I walked to the edge, spawned behind me, and tapped the silk netting that covered the alpha's body. It shook. The larva watched. Breath hitched. Hunger stirred. Good. I stepped back. The spawn stepped forward. It sniffed the silk, then dug 1 claw under the netting, tore a line, exposed fur. It lunged. Not a bite. An injection. Its tail, long and barbed at the end, curled once, struck under the ribcage of the Jagras, and implanted. The process had begun again. I stood silently as the second host convulsed. The spawn retreated, tail twitching with residual discharge. Then turned to me. Not confused. Not aggressive. Waiting. I answered. Short hiss. Tail raised. Turned back toward the main tunnel. It followed. No leash. No command. Just bond. Outside, the night had cooled. The stars over Wild Spire didn't twinkle. They watched. I climbed the ridge above the cactus grove and let the air move across my carapace. The wind tasted of mud. The Diablos was still dead. The Rathian still gone. Nothing new had entered this quadrant. And beside me, the spawn crouched. Still and silent. Its eyes opened for the first time. 4 of them. Black. Narrow. Focused. Not blind anymore. Not helpless. The hive had begun. Chapter 9, How to Raise a Predator. The larva had slept for exactly 27 minutes after implantation. Its body curled tightly into itself, all limbs tucked, tail sheathed under its chest, breathing shallow. A defensive posture natural, inherited, instinctual. Even now, it learned from the world without guidance. Muscle memory passed through generations, even if this one had no genetic ancestor. I didn't interrupt its rest. I sat at the far end of the nest, watching the silk on the walls shift in the breeze of its tiny exhale. Not because I was sentimental. Because I was waiting for the moment it woke up without fear. When it stirred, it didn't jerk. It opened its limbs one by one, flexed each digit in sequence, then stood carefully. Slowly. Like something that knew it had no one to catch it if it fell. That was the correct reaction. I did not breed weakness. I rose and hissed once. Short, direct. Two-toned. Come. Its head turned toward me instantly. The 4 black eyes narrowed, glowing faintly beneath their second membrane. No words. No hesitation. It followed. We moved into the outer tunnel system. Not far. Just far enough to let it smell new ground. I pressed 1 claw into the walls at intervals, dragging a narrow scent trail with residual acid, letting it anchor its navigation. It mimicked me. imperfectly. Too shallow at first. The second line crooked. The third clean. That was fast. Faster than I expected. Most ARK spawn took hours before they could trace movement beyond the nest. This one had already internalized pacing, angle, direction. I led it to the base of the Spire Canyon. Not where I'd captured the Jagras. Further east. Where the dead Noyos had fallen. I'd left the carcass there deliberately. Testing. Now it was still there. Half rotted. Flies thick around the eyes. Gut bloated. Wing torn. The spawn circled it. Didn't bite. Just watched. Good. No mindless hunger. I crouched beside the body and tapped the exposed sternum once. The spawn mirrored me. Tapped once. I repeated. This time 2 taps. Then moved behind the corpse. Waited. The spawn hesitated. Shifted weight. Thought. Then followed. Flanked the corpse from the other side. We stood in mirror positions. 2 predators. 2 angles. Same target. I hissed a single pulse. It attacked. The lunge was clean. Not messy. The spawn led with its lower jaw, cracked the Noyos's ribcage, and clamped down across the side of its neck. Not to feed. To end. That surprised me. Even dead, the prey was treated as if it could resist. It bit down for 5 seconds. Then released. Then looked to me. I made no sound. Instead, I moved to the corpse and pretended to retrieve something from the mouth, an imagined kill reward. I stood straight. Paused. Waited. The spawn understood. It returned to the opposite side and did the same bit once more, then stepped back and curled its tail upward in anticipation. Mimicking hierarchy. Not dominance. Recognition. I gave the signal to feed. It obeyed instantly. The feeding was quiet. Efficient. No waste. The spawn peeled away the hide with hooked claws, bit clean through the chest wall, then split the belly open with 2 downward strokes. Its breathing stayed steady. Tail coiled. Every 10 seconds, it stopped feeding to check my position. Still watching. Still learning. That was what I needed. Not obedience. Adaptability. I led it back into the tunnel slowly. The sun had started to fall again. The heat cooled in stages. Wind patterns changed. Small insects moved toward the outer banks. A water beetle scurried past my claw. The spawn didn't lunge. It watched. Then trapped it with a claw tip. It stared. Then turned away. That was significant. No wasted motion. I hissed a low signal. 3 tones. Return. It followed. Without question. The nest was darker than before. The Jagras still writhed in his silk-lined pit. The larva inside him had begun its expansion. His ribs flexed involuntarily. Mouth open. Legs twitching. Soon, very soon. The first spawn stood at the edge. Watched. Did not move. Its breathing shifted short, rapid. Body language changed. I stepped between it and the pit. It did not protest. Instead, it mimicked my tail position. Raised. Still. That was what mattered. I turned slowly and led it to the rear tunnel, the false branch. I stepped inside. Let it follow. Then snapped my tail across the opening and hissed twice. Stop. It froze. Half inside. Half out. I struck it. Not hard. Just enough to knock its balance. It fell backward. scrambled to its feet. Hissed not with anger. With awareness. I stepped back into the main chamber. Raised my tail again. Lesson. It understood. Now it would never enter the false tunnel again. We rested at the nest edge. I wrapped my tail around the perimeter. The spawn lay beside it. Did not touch me. Just stayed close. Its breathing slowed. Its spine adjusted. Still watching. Always watching. I let my dorsal sacs dim completely. No glow. Just silence. The nest pulsed once deep beneath the soil. The Jagraz's breath hitched. The second would be born soon. And now, the first was ready. Chapter 10, the map they draw without meaning to. I left the spawn curled at the center of the nest. Not sleeping. It didn't need sleep yet. But resting. Its limbs tucked in tight beneath its frame, its tail wrapped across its hind legs. Not a defensive position. Not quite. More like, stillness with purpose. A waiting posture. Like it understood I was leaving. Like it trusted that I would return. I didn't look back when I stepped into the upper tunnel. Trust was mutual. Or it would be. That, too, was part of the training. I moved west through the dry veins of Wildspire Waste, keeping low to the walls and staying off the open sand. Not for fear of predators, there were none here that could challenge me now, but because I needed silence. I needed control. I needed to listen. Not to the monsters. To the people. The guild scouts had returned to the outer reaches of Sector 2. That meant patrols. That meant data collection. And that meant they were drawing maps. Astera didn't operate like the older fleets. I remembered that from the game. Fifth Fleet was made of specialists. Researchers. Adaptive teams. They didn't hammer threats down with sheer numbers. They observed. They patterned. They built systems. If I left the corpses out, if I showed my kills, if I moved in straight lines, they would find me. Not quickly. But inevitably. And I wouldn't survive a siege. So I moved toward their scent. The outer edge of Sector 2 had changed in the days since the Rathian vanished. The ground was scattered with small, color-marked flags. Red fir prints. Yellow fir clawed trees. Blue fir mucus. I saw at least 3 different handlers over the course of an hour, none of them armed, but all of them moving with trained alertness. They weren't just looking for the monsters. They were looking for absence. The places where creatures should have been but weren't. That was how they found me. In theory. In practice. They were still off by several kilometers. I followed one patrol team from the cliffs. 2 humans. 1 palico. One of the humans wore scout fly lanterns strung across his belt. They pulsed every 20 seconds, green for trace contact, orange when the signal dimmed. It stayed orange the whole time. He was searching for Rathian. He wouldn't find her. I'd buried her under 2 meters of resin-soaked mud and acid-stained bone. But his patterns would teach me something else. Where they assumed the fight happened. Where they believed she had been ambushed. It was all fiction. But fiction still left footprints. They stopped at a spire on the high ridge above the basin. One of the men pointed toward a section of cracked stone, circling a pattern with his finger in the air. The palico held up a trace sensor. It glowed faint green. Not from blood. From heat residue. I froze. That wasn't in the game. That was new. Guild equipment had advanced. They were reading the air. Not the sand. Not the bone. The radiant profile of the terrain after a large creature passed through. And I had stood there for nearly 6 minutes after dragging the Rathian skull into the tunnel. 6 minutes too long. They had a thermal signature. Not fresh, but recent. I hissed low under my breath, tail twitching once. Then turned to the wall and climbed. No sound. No marks. I stayed above them for the next 3 hours. Watching. Noting. Measuring every step they took, every signal they read, every point they marked on the unfolded field map that now hung from their camp stand. They were triangulating. Not accurately, but close. By sundown, they moved back toward the sub-camp on the canyon's edge. I followed at a distance, low to the crevices, my limbs pulled tight to the stone. The camp was rudimentary. Just a tent, a handler station, and a portable antenna rig transmitting back to Astera. No weapons. No defenses. But one very large map laid out over a table. Color-coded. Scent-coded. Even time-coded. Every known apex had been marked with sightings and interactions. Diablos, last seen 4 days ago. Barath, presumed relocated. Rathian, high alert. Tracking priority. They had a red ring circled around Sector 7. Too close to the nest. No exact markers. No expedition plans. Just a possible location of interest. But it was a matter of time. I watched the camp until full night. Then I descended. I didn't kill them. I didn't need to. Killing them would trigger another wave harsher, louder, with better gear. What I needed was misdirection. I crept down the far slope and dragged my claws gently through the sand long, shallow, erratic trails. Too long for a Kulu. Too straight for a Jagras. The kind of trails a panicked monster would leave if it had been wounded and was dragging itself away from a fight. I laid out 4 different tracks. Then pissed on one. Barath scent. Old, but strong enough to override. Then I climbed the far wall, dipped my tail into my own acid gland, and carved a short series of claw marks into the rock deep, wide, and high off the ground. Unnaturally high. Not Diablos. Not anything they'd know. Let them guess. Let them assume. Let them write their own story. I dropped one final piece near the camp's edge, a cracked chunk of Rathian scale. Dissolved at the edges. Warped with heat. Impossible to place. It would drive the biologists mad. That was the point. By the time I returned to the nest, the first spawn had dragged itself to the pit edge. The Jagras host was still writhing. Still alive. But close. The spawn didn't touch it. Didn't hiss. Just stood beside the pit, watching the body ripple as the larva inside shifted beneath the muscle. The spawn turned toward me as I entered. No words. No sound. But recognition. I flicked my tail once. You did well. It didn't reply. But it curled its claws tighter and lowered its head. The closest thing I would ever get to pride. Chapter 11, begin with 1 stone. The nest pulsed with heat. The kind that didn't come from air or fire, but from life layered under earth. The Jagras host still twitched in the pit. The larva inside him had begun its final rotations, spinal flexes, rib pressure, tissue detachment. I could feel it in the vibrations. I didn't need to see. The firstborn stood beside the pit in perfect silence, head bowed, unmoving. It was watching. Listening. Learning. But we didn't need more eyes on this one. The second spawn would emerge soon. The nest was ready. I had taught the first. I would train the second. But to survive, we needed space. To grow, we needed rooms. To thrive, we needed hives. This nest would not be the last. I began walking before the sun rose. Not above ground. Not again. The guild was moving faster now, too fast. Their patrols fanned out every nightfall, laying trace sensors behind even the smallest rock formations. Some of their scout flies didn't return. Others came back with altered flight paths. The research commission would notice the pattern. I wouldn't wait for them to find me. So I turned inward. Downward. Toward the stone veins beneath Wild Spire. I moved east from the main chamber, through the thin corridor I'd dug days ago, the one with the Nursilla remains still stitched into the walls. The scent was weaker now. Faded silk. Dry resin. Old rot. That would change soon. I passed the threshold where the ground sloped again, steeper than usual. Jagged walls. Lower oxygen. Better. No scout fly would fly this far. No hunter would crawl this deep. This was where the second nest would grow. The stone was a layered kind of brittle clay mixed with fossil sediment. Soft enough to claw through, but not enough to collapse. That mattered. I didn't just need tunnels. I needed chambers. I tested 3 walls with my claws' light taps, then pressure hooks. 2 gave too easily. They would crack. Collapse under vibration. But the third. It held. I scraped a small opening wide enough for my shoulders, then pulled myself through. The cavern was smaller than I wanted, only 7 meters long, no wider than 3. Sloped on one end. Sharp rise on the other. But it had water. Not a pool. A trickle. Thin, clear mineral water dripped from the ceiling, formed small ridges along the floor, and vanished into cracks below. More than enough to keep silk moist. Enough for heat to collect if I laid the right bone lining. It would work. I sealed the entrance with silk. Marked the tunnel with a fresh acid gland spray. This was chamber 1. I mapped outward from there. Using sonar. Not sight. I placed a claw against the eastern wall, pulsed my dorsal sacs in slow intervals, and listened. 3 echoes returned. One was short. Solid. Stone dense. Dead end. One was scattered. Reflected from too many angles. Possibly cracked. Unstable. But the third? It bounced back slow. Wide. A low-pitch hum from something open. I turned and began digging. The stone was colder here. Older. Unmarked by monster claw or human presence. As I burrowed, I began leaving silk markers every 20 steps. Thin lines stretched across the tunnel ceiling, each marked with a unique chemical scent. Not strong enough to attract. Just enough for me to follow. And for my spawn. When they grew. When they learned the tunnels. They'd know where to go. Which walls were safe. Which turns led home. I didn't teach them with words. I taught them with design. The new cavern cracked open 2 hours later. Wider than the first. Much wider. 20 meters across. Natural. Formed from an old water basin long since dry. Crystals lined the far wall. Not the kind the commission mined. These were dull. Inert. But sharp. Good for carving. I could turn those into nest anchors. They would hold silk better than bone. I marked the floor in spirals, curved lines, drawn by tail teeth, soaked in acid. They would fade in 3 days. That was fine. The spawn would learn before then. I dropped 3 resin sacks from my side vents, rolled them into the floor, then spread a layer of Nursilla silk across the lowest part of the chamber. This would be the implantation pit. Chamber 2 was now a womb. I returned to chamber 1 and began backtracking toward the main nest. The tunnels were longer now. Wider. I'd carved anchor points every 20 meters. Enough to reinforce with silk once the spawn grew large enough to assist. I imagined them moving here 3, maybe 4 at first. Each trained. Each bearing the acid. Each learning the hum of the stone. Patrols. Scouts. Not wild. Not uncontrolled. Directed. They wouldn't lash out randomly. They would follow marks. Respond to hisses. Surround threats. Take hosts. They would know who to kill. And who to leave alive long enough to listen. I returned just before nightfall. The nest smelled different now. The first spawn stood again. Coiled beside the Jagra's pit. No sound. No hiss. Just watching. The host had swollen grotesquely. Faint blood at the corners of the mouth. Skin stretched too tight across the ribs. Eyes rolled upward, clouded. The larva was near. Maybe ours. I stepped behind the spawn and let my dorsal sacs pulse twice. The spawn mimicked me. Perfectly. Same rhythm. No delay. I touched the edge of the pit with my claw. Then turned to the main tunnel. The spawn didn't follow. It returned to its vigil. It chose to remain. I didn't need to order it. I didn't need to control it. It was doing what I would have done. What I had done. Guard the next to be born. It would teach the second without being told. And when they were ready, the tunnels would be waiting. Chapter 12, Feather, Flight, and Flesh. The firstborn did not leave the Jagra's pit. It stood vigil, tail wrapped along the curve of the silk basin, 4 eyes watching without blinking. Every shift in the host's ribcage, every flutter of dying breath it recorded. Not with reason. Not with comprehension. With instinct. I could have stayed. Watched with it. Observed the moment the second spawn broke free from its host's ribcage and took its first wet breath. But the hive would starve if I lingered. And the next stage required blood. I left the nest in silence. The tunnel sealed behind me with a single line of tension thread, snapped taut across the entry point. If anything passed through it, I would feel the vibration. And the spawn would know, too. Above ground, wild spire waste shimmered with morning heat. The sky had not yet cleared the early haze, and mist pooled over the dry riverbeds like low breath from a dying throat. Good. The light would stay soft. That made flyers easier to track. I climbed the ridge north of Sector 3 and pressed low against the petrified tree stumps that ringed the cliffs. My claws found holds between the stone ribs of the long-dead behemoth embedded in the slope. I could see the nesting hollow just past the arch. Noyos. 8 of them. Maybe more in the trees. They lined the upper crags of the sandstone basin, wings tucked, heads low. Most slept. 2 kept watch, perched on high ledges. Their feathers ruffled in the wind, but they didn't stir. Noyos weren't strong. But they were fast. And worse, they warned each other. I wouldn't be able to take just one. I had to kill at least 4 before the others took flight. And I had only seconds once I began. I circled the basin's eastern wall, claws dragging against the stone, no sound. The ledge here was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders. But it lined perfectly with the central nest. I counted 3 juveniles inside the hollow. Smaller. Less mass. Easier to drag. I would need 1 juvenile for implantation, 1 adult for immediate feeding, and 1 to store for the hatch chamber. That meant 3 clean kills. Minimum. I laid 2 silk cords along the ledge behind me, anchoring them into a V formation with resin. These would act as catch lines if any flyer tried to escape back along this route, it would hit the thread and tumble. I tested the tension. Held. Then moved. The first kill was silent. I lunged down into the nest hollow, claws extended, and raked the throat of the nearest adult. Its head turned at the last second. Too late. My acid-coated claw split its jugular and its wing all at once. It didn't scream. Didn't have time. The juveniles scattered but not far. They didn't understand what was happening. I caught one by the wing and smashed it into the stone wall. It crumpled. The third tried to bolt upward. I wrapped its throat in silk and slammed it to the floor. Too slow. 3 down. 1 breathing. Too still. The others screamed above. I heard wings flap dozens at once. They launched. I leapt. Not after them. Above them. Clawed into the cliff face and let the silk thread behind me snap. It lashed forward like a whip, caught one of the Noyo's mid-wing beat, and sent it spinning into the basin wall. It hit. Hard. Feathers scattered. Bones snapped. I dropped after it. 5 kills in 30 seconds. Acceptable. I silenced the juvenile last, choking it with a resin spray across its beak, then lashing its legs to its own back so it couldn't thrash. I kept it alive. Its eyes twitched beneath the lid. Fear. Shallow pulse. Perfect. It would be implanted within the hour. I dragged the corpses back to the ridge, one by one, lashing them together with silk cord and threading the ends through a harness built from Kuluyaku sinew. I strapped the juvenile to my underside and lifted the rest on my back, then turned east. The nest was 4 kilometers away. I didn't stop once. The tunnels were silent when I returned. The firstborn stood now beside the split silk cocoon. The Jagra's host had burst open, ribcage cracked, blood pooled, throat torn. The second spawn crouched over the remains, head low, body shaking in small waves. Still wet. Still blind. But breathing. It hissed once. Weak. The firstborn didn't answer. Just watched. Then moved forward and pressed its snout against the second's. Gently. Deliberately. 1 touch. Then turned and backed away. I didn't interfere. It would know its sibling by scent now. By blood. That mattered more than words. I dropped the carcasses into the lower chamber 2. The juvenile I kept lashed near the edge, pinned to a bone hook. It flailed once, tried to squawk. Couldn't. I coiled my tail and waited. The second spawn would feed. Then implant. Then grow. And then we would begin hunting together. Chapter 13, Teach them to hunt. The second spawn had not yet dried. Its limbs still trembled with each breath. The blood from the Jagra's host clung to its shoulder blades in thick streaks of black-red, coagulating in pools beneath its feet. It blinked irregularly, slow, unfocused. Its tail twitched every few seconds, not from intention, but from the instinctual contractions of something newly formed. Still weak. But not helpless. I circled the edge of chamber 2, dragging the corpses of the Noyos into a loose semicircle around the implantation pit. The juvenile flyer still writhed where I had pinned it to the bone hook, no sound, only the quiet, fluttering beat of its pulse. One eye open. One leg flexing at the joint. Wait. And listen. The second spawn turned toward the sound but didn't move. The firstborn crouched across from me, limbs curled under its body, tail wrapped along the rim of the pit. Still. Focused. I lowered myself into the dirt and hissed once, short, narrowband tone. Watch. The firstborn didn't move. Only its dorsal fin twitched once. The second spawn flinched at the sound. It tried to step forward. Stumbled. Didn't fall. Its claws splayed out into the silk-lined floor. Grip stabilized. Another step. Then another. It turned its head toward the juvenile, nostrils flaring. It smelled the living meat. It wanted it. Good. But it wouldn't earn it. Not yet. I rose and walked to the edge of the feeding circle. 2 of the dead Noyos had already begun to spoil. Too long in the sun. I raked my claw down the breastbone of one, splitting it open with a wet crack. Acid dripped into the wound. The smell grew heavier. More intense. I turned toward the second spawn and hissed twice longer tone. Follow. It hesitated. Then moved. Step by step. Its posture was different from the firstborn's. Less controlled. Its head wobbled slightly with each movement, as if the balance hadn't yet caught up with the body. It stepped into the semicircle. Paused. Lowered its head. And bit into the flesh. The firstborn moved then. Fast. Not toward the food. Toward me. It positioned itself at my right side, shoulder behind mine, tail low. Not defensive. Protective. It had interpreted the command. Understood the priority. I turned my head slightly and hissed a third tone short, clipped. Observe. The firstborn turned its head toward the second. Watched in silence. The feeding lasted a minute. Maybe 2. Then the second spawn backed away, face wet with blood, breath faster now. I raised my tail and flicked the tip once. It flinched. The firstborn did not. I began the lesson. The juvenile was still alive. Its eyes tracked us as I circled to the far wall of the chamber, slow and wide. I left a trail of scent along the resin-patched wall's silk-wrapped claw scrapes, marked with low pH acid. Traceable. Not burning. A signal. I placed my body behind a cluster of old stone ribs embedded in the wall and dropped into a crouch. Then hissed once. Come. The firstborn moved without hesitation. Took position beside me. No sound. No display. Just readiness. The second spawn hesitated. Then followed. It was slower. Louder. It took 3 seconds to find a crouch posture. Still acceptable. I scraped one claw across the rib beside me, then repeated the gesture on the floor. 2 strokes. The spawn copied. Perfectly. I turned my eyes toward the juvenile and flexed my dorsal sacs twice. The firstborn followed with 1 flick. The second did nothing. It didn't understand yet. I moved into the ambush position. Low to the ground, legs tight beneath the torso, tail coiled like a spring. My breathing stopped entirely. The firstborn mirrored me. Almost identically. Only its rear left foot drifted a little too far back. I hissed corrective tone. It adjusted. The second spawn crouched too high. Exposed shoulder ridge. Head too forward. I let it stay that way. It needed to learn why that position failed. I struck first. Not at the prey. At the air. I lunged without contact, landing 1 meter from the juvenile and hissing loud enough to trigger panic. The flyer thrashed against the hook, flapped both wings, and screeched. The second spawn lunged instantly. Too early. It lost balance. Its claws scraped the stone. It struck the pit edge and rolled sideways, tail lashing as it tried to stand. The firstborn waited. Still. I flicked my tail upward. Command. It leapt. Straight line. 1 clean bite across the Noyos's throat. Silk caught on the hook. The prey flipped once, then stopped. Dead. The second spawn stopped moving. Breathing ragged. Eyes wide. Watching. Learning. I returned to the wall. Coiled my tail. Tapped the claw once. Then again. Try again. I lashed another Noyo's corpse to the bone hook. Not living, but heavy enough to mimic motion. I dragged it slowly across the chamber floor and turned my back to it. Then hissed again. 2 notes. Both spawn moved now. Firstborn took position behind the rib wall again. Second hesitated. Then joined. Same crouch. Closer this time. Lower. Better. I moved back. Let them take the front. The second spawn flicked its tail by accident. Too loud. The firstborn's head turned sharply. Watched. Adjusted distance. When I hissed the launch tone short sharp burst, they both moved. Perfectly synchronized. The dead Noyos flipped once under the strike. The second spawn bit into the neck. Wrong angle. Hit the bone. But held. Didn't let go. The firstborn circled the flank and bit the wing. Together they brought it down. Training. Not instinct. They stood over the corpse together. Not fighting. Not flaring. The firstborn stepped back. Let the second feed first. I didn't command that. It chose to yield. I walked forward and placed a claw on the firstborn's shoulder. Pressure. Not praise. Just recognition. Its tail flicked once. Then stilled. We repeated the process 6 more times. Simulated movement. Wing flutters. Shifting wind. Unsteady terrain. The second spawn failed 3 times. Succeeding once would have been enough. But it succeeded twice. And by the end, it waited for the signal. Every time. That was enough. Chapter 14, When the ground opens beneath them. We rose before the sun. The second spawn still breathed too fast in its sleep. Its rib movements were uneven, shallow on the left, sharp on the right. That would correct itself in a day or 2. The firstborn had begun to twitch less in its idle stance. Its balance, too, had shifted. Where it once leaned on the outer forelimbs, now it supported itself evenly, tail, shoulder, claw. A triangle of tension. It was stable. They were ready. Not perfect, but ready. And it was time to teach them the outside. Not from scent. Not from meat. From motion. The surface would teach them wind. Depth. Confusion. I led them through the tunnel in a single file. First me. Then the firstborn. Then the second. I didn't look back. Not once. If they couldn't follow without sound, they weren't worthy of breath. But they did follow. Quiet. Precise. The passage up to Sector 4 was tight, narrow, not meant for larger monsters. That's why I chose it. Not even Diablos used this path, too shallow for full burrowing, too steep for a charge. It opened behind a boulder ring near the dry basin north of the central stone arch. From above, the canyon looked empty. It wasn't. 4 Kestodon grazed just below, heads low, tusks buried in the red earth. Perfect. Slow enough to stalk. Fast enough to chase. Smart enough to panic. I crouched low behind the first ridge and scanned the wind. West to east. That meant we would approach from the east, circle downward, and strike from the shadowed side. I drew the spawns in close. Firstborn crouched immediately. No sound. Second spawn followed, slower. Its claws scraped the rock once. Too loud. I turned and struck it across the snout, not hard, just sharp. It flinched. Then stilled. I watched for 1 breath. Then turned again. That was its last warning. We moved across the high ledge together, bodies low, limbs tight, tails curled just under our bellies. The firstborn mirrored my pace perfectly, 7 seconds to crawl 5 meters, claws placed only in grooves already carved by mine. The second spawn's pacing was off by less than a second. But it was there. We reached the boulder crest as the first Kestodon lifted its head. It looked toward the sun. Not us. Still safe. I flicked my tail once, wait. Then again move. The firstborn lunged forward, leaping from the ledge down to the basin below. Clean arc. Precise landing. It struck the third Kestodon from behind, tail slamming across its rear legs. The prey staggered. Didn't scream. Didn't see it. Then the second spawn followed. Less elegant. It dropped too far left, hit the second Kestodon's side. The Kestodon turned, swung its head, tusks flaring wide. Clashed. The second spawn skidded back, scraped the ground, then hissed. A mistake. The others heard it. The fourth Kestodon broke into a run. Toward me. I dropped. Not slow. Not careful. Just heavy. 600 kilos of reaper mass struck the stone. The earth cracked. The Kestodon saw me, flinched. Too late. I smashed my forelimb into its neck and crushed it against the basin floor. Blood spattered in a half ring. The remaining two screamed. Now the hunt was real. I turned toward the spawns. The second was already back on its feet, stalking the injured target. Its flank bled from where the tusk had clipped it. Not deep. It didn't notice. It moved now with purpose. Slower. Lower. Smarter. The firstborn circled behind. Both moved in tandem. No signal needed. They understood. The Kestodon ran. The firstborn curved wide and cut it off at the knees. The second spawn launched forward, struck low, caught the back leg in its teeth. The prey rolled once, slammed into a rock, and screamed. Then silence. Together they fed. Side by side. I let them eat alone. The remaining Kestodon was gone. Vanished into the distance. Its scent trailed northeast, toward the central canyon. I followed. Not quickly. Deliberate. Teaching by movement. I kept my tail low, dorsal sacs dimmed. I let the spawns hear the silence I made. No dust. No sound. They would copy it. Or die. The trail ended near a stone ring, where the ground curved around a fossilized water sink. The Kestodon was curled inside. Shivering. It had given up running. I circled the far ridge. Let the firstborn come from the south. Second from the north. We closed the triangle together. I gave no signal. I didn't need to. They had learned. The firstborn struck the stone beside the sinkhole, not the prey. The noise startled it upright. It didn't flee. It tried to charge. I waited. The second spawn darted in behind, tail raised, and tripped at mid-step. It collapsed. I lunged and drove my tail through its back. Not for the kill. For implantation. My venom gland twitched. The egg was injected. Host marked. We would return for it later. The spawns stood beside me. Both covered in blood. Still. Not breathing heavy. I raised my tail. 2 pulses. They stepped back. Understood. We left the corpse. Let the enzymes begin their work. By morning, it would begin to swell. By nightfall, it would split open. The third would rise. And the hunt would grow. Chapter 15, We Will Fall From Above. The kill site still pulsed with warmth when we left it. The Kestodon's spine twitched beneath the silken membrane that sealed the wound shut. The larval sac had nested successfully beneath the ribcage, just beside the heart, where it could feed without killing too fast. Already, the body smelled wrong acid and rot and something deeper. The second spawn lingered by the edge of the corpse, as if it sensed the thing growing inside it. The firstborn did not linger. It turned and followed me the moment I raised my tail. The difference between them was widening. The second was stronger, but slower. Bloodier. Less precise. The first was silent. Tuned. The second would learn to match it. Or I would kill it. We returned through the western tunnel. The sun had begun to fall behind the cliffs, and the upper stone had started to leach heat into the sand. I moved fast, tail dragging a line through the dust to confuse scent trails. Above, I saw scout flies in the distance, green and tight, orbiting low to the northeast. They hadn't reached Sector 4 yet. The guild was still searching too far north. The false trail would hold for another day or two. Maybe less. It didn't matter. Once the third spawned, the surface wouldn't be safe anymore. So the nest had to change. When we re-entered the tunnel system, I led the spawns not toward the main nest chamber, but toward the east tunnel. The side path I'd mapped weeks ago, narrow, steep, choked with brittle limestone. They hadn't seen it yet. I let them follow without instruction. They didn't hesitate. They moved in sequence, firstborn behind me, secondborn behind it. The corridor twisted once, then dropped. We descended. I marked the corner with acid as I passed, thin, nearly scentless, but bitter enough to warn any wandering insect. Below us, the root wall. The hollow zone. The beginning of the ambush chamber. It wasn't finished yet. At its center, the chamber was barely more than a crack between two massive ribs of petrified wood. They curved inward from the sandstone ceiling, creating a half shell of mineral-stiffened roots. I'd found the formation by accident days ago, and cleared a quarter of the space. But I hadn't opened it fully. It was time. I extended both claws and pressed against the left root, dragging my forearm in a slow downward arc. Chunks fell. Resin cracked. The tunnel groaned. But it held. I called the spawns forward with a hiss. The firstborn reached my side instantly. The second hesitated again, body close to the floor, eyes darting. Still too cautious. Still unbalanced. I stepped aside and motioned inward. The chamber stretched up. Maybe 10 meters vertical, at the peak. Thin ceiling, narrow slope. I struck the far wall and let the sound echo upward. It rebounded back. Not as sound. As space. It was hollow above. Natural venting from heat pressure. I turned to the spawns. Hissed once. Then climbed. The climb wasn't easy. The stone flaked beneath my weight. The walls weren't smooth, they curved in slow spirals, shaped by years of thermal erosion. I embedded my claws deep, one at a time, and left resin anchors every meter. When I reached the ceiling, I stopped. There was no opening yet. Just a thin plate of shale. I pressed my snout against it. Smelled wind. Not strong. But fresh. I drove both claws upward and split the ceiling in a single, muffled crack. Light streamed down. Soft. Dim. Filtered through dust and cactus roots. I waited. Listened. No sound. No wind shift. Safe. I widened the hole, carving a narrow vent that spiraled down into the chamber below. Not enough for a full descent. Just wide enough for a spawn to pass through. Then I dropped back into the hollow and marked 3 anchor points along the wall. Silk lines. Resin hooks. I struck each one, tested the tension. The sound echoed properly. I hissed again 2 tones. The spawns approached. The second-born stared up at the vent, confused. The firstborn was already climbing. Not fast, but correct. I waited at the wall, watching its limbs move: right claw, left foot, tail brace. No mistakes. It reached the ceiling and coiled into the hole, silent. Perfect. I gestured to the second. It hesitated again. Then climbed. 3 mistakes. Wrong foot. Tail drag. Shoulder slip. But it made it. Acceptable. Now we built the kill zone. I pulled 6 of the old Jagra's ribs from storage, lashed them together with fresh silk, and mounted them across the ceiling edge. Not spikes. Triggers. A-frame. When the silk cords attached to them were pulled by weight, by sound, by blood, they would rip free and fall. They would drag the spawn down with them. It wasn't a trap. It was a launch point. An ambush descent. I led them through the drills one at a time. Firstborn first. It climbed to the ceiling. Waited on the trigger ledge. I hissed once. Then dropped a bone onto the floor. The sound snapped. The frame shook. The silk released. And the spawn fell perfectly. Claws extended. Tail curled for balance. It struck the floor in silence. Stood. Turned. Waited. I hissed. Again. Repeat. Secondborn's turn. Climbed slower. Waited. Bone dropped. Missed the cue. Fell late. Too heavy. Hit the wall. Scraped shoulder. Didn't break anything. Stood anyway. Tail trembling. I hissed again. No sympathy. Only command. Climb again. Repeat. Again. Again. Until it hit the descent perfectly. By the end of the session, both could fall in silence. Both could land without sound. The triggers worked. The silk held. Now, when something entered the nest through that vent or beneath it, the spawn would wait above, unmoving. And when it passed below, they would fall. Together. A living trap. I left them in the hollow that night. Both asleep, pressed together by instinct, not command. Their breath synchronized. Their spines rose and fell at the same pace. Not a bond yet, but a rhythm. It would become one. Soon. The hive was learning. And I would teach it everything.